home. I hope if it jumps on your home that it's not any worse than it was mine, because quite enjoyed it. To be honest with you, I got paid to go ride my mule and squirrel hunt just about every day. I understand a lot of people aren't so fortunate, but I was able to listen in on to your lessons and preaching and singing, and we took communion right along with you, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to do that. Finishing up our lesson on Deuteronomy, I have us over on number 4 where it says key verses down to number 3. Been a while, hadn't it? So we're going to talk about some key words and some things that relate both to them and to us. Key words: land, mentioned 190 times, the land that they had been promised. Took them a long time to get there, but they're here now. Here, 25 times, and remember, 14 times. Note also the words do, keep, blessing, and curse, and also covenant. Do, keep. The do and the keep, whether we do or we don't do, or whether we keep or we don't keep, brings on blessing or curse, just like we've studied so many times through the book of, I guess the greatest takeaway that I wasn't aware of until we began this study of the book of Deuteronomy. I had always known that after they crossed the Red Sea and they left Mount Sinai, that it took them 40 years to get to the Jordan River to cross over into Canaan. I had no idea that it was their lack of faith and lack of obedience that made that a 40-year trip instead of an 11-day trip. What's the takeaway? There's a great lesson in there for us, Tom. Things can be a lot easier than we make it. Things could have been a lot easier than they made it. They didn't have to sleep in the woods for 40 years. They could have kept God's commandments. They could have done what He said. They could have had their faith. And they'd have been there in 2 weeks. Where could we be now? Where could James be now with a different level of faith? What have I suffered through that I shouldn't have had to suffer through had I had faith and been more obedient in my life? We'll never know, will we?
This is a hard way, I'll take
It appears so.
Yeah.
I'm the same way, Tom. Sometimes I make things a lot harder than they need to be. And like I say, for me, I don't know if you feel that way or not, if I don't take anything else from this lesson, I'm going to take that away. That sometimes we'll never know how much more difficult we make things on ourselves than we need to. Applications. In spite of all that God had done for Moses, in spite of all God had done and Moses had taught, the people still disobeyed after they got the promised land. Judges talks about disobedience in the land, taken out of the land as a result. I'm going to flip over here to Judges and read from chapter 2, verses 11 through 15. So once again, after they received the promise, beginning in verse 11, talking about Israel's unfaithfulness, and the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals. And they abandoned the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. They went after other gods from among the gods of the peoples who were around them and bowed down to them, and they provoked the Lord to anger. They abandoned the Lord and served the Baals and the Ashtaroth. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and He gave them over to plunderers who plundered them, and He sold them into the hand of the surrounding enemies, so that they could no longer withstand their enemies. Same story, different group of folks. Same story. They had it. They were living in the milk and honey. They were living in the land of promise. Once again, they turned their back on God and brought curse rather than blessing upon themselves. Any thoughts before we move on? Happens today as well. I guess we're at a point in our history, most times when I think about things like this happening, I think about it on an individual basis or a congregational basis, that lack of faith and disobedience can lead to a cursed life, things being bad for me. The example here is the fate of a nation. Does that apply to us today? I'm afraid that it does. There is a point where I believe we can be so far removed from God and what He teaches that God could turn us over and give us a little humility. And that might take a minute.
But I think what mankind in general forgets is, and don't know or have decided not to believe is, the more, let's just use our country for instance, the more a country gets into the darkness, God don't live in the darkness.
He does not.
And the more we get in darkness, people don't realize, the further we get away from God.
That's exactly right.
And to me, and I may be wrong on this, it's not so much that God left us, it's the fact that we're going where He ain't. And how can we possibly expect Him to protect us when we're in that darkness?
Always remember this, though, guys. No matter how bad it gets, anywhere, our nation, our community, every lesson that we've studied so far, from Genesis to now, there's always been a remnant. Even the study that Dan and Kenneth did for us on Wednesday nights on Romans, there's always been a remnant of those who were obedient and God took care of. We're going to look at a great example of that in the book of Joshua as well. And I also found it interesting that in their disobedience that caused them to wander around in this desert for 40 years rather than be in the promised land in 2 weeks. Remember what we said about their sandals and their clothes? They never what? They never wore out. So even in their disobedience, God loved them and took care of them, didn't He? So, comforting thought as well.
James, that story in the Old Testament about that Baal guy, all his worshipers and stuff, and he got challenged, and he couldn't get fire from Baal down there.
That's right.
And whenever he called on God, he put all that water and everything else on it, he still set it on fire.
Wet it down.
Yeah, wet it down.
Wet it down.
Set it on fire anyway.
If any of you have ever been freezing to death out there by a creek somewhere after it rained, that story means a whole lot more to you. Hard to burn wet wood, isn't it, Billy? Importance of obedience there, number 2, application of James chapter 1 and verse 22. I'll read that for you there. I believe it's, therefore all filthiness and rampant wickedness, and receive the meekness, the implanted word, which is able to save your soul. But ye be doers of the word, not hearers only, yourselves. So, faith is what sustains us. Lack of faith brings on this disobedience. According to what we just read here and other passages, where does faith come from? The Word.
James, while we're there, you, James, we can back up just a little bit and look over a couple of chapters to chapter 3, and it talks about two kinds of wisdom.
Earthly and godly.
Earthly and godly wisdom. So, coming from the man-made country or whatever, we're just following earthly wisdom.
That's exactly right.
And that's what happened to Israel. It just seems like we don't learn from history.
The importance of not only study, as far as building our faith goes, there's a lot of merit to spending time with each other talking about these things. I don't know how many times I've told you that I've probably talked more Bible in a boat than I maybe have in church. And that was such a blessing to me. A lot of my friends that I have and I'm surrounded by every day, we talk Bible a lot. Any opportunity that I have, I'm thrilled to know that where both my girls are working now, the clinic they work at, they have a little Devo time in your life. Especially with your children. Especially with your children. We'll talk more about that here in just a second. That also comes from Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 6, the importance of obedience. We have to know what the will of God is to enable us to be obedient to it. We need to think, meditate on these things, and then probably the chore is the second in James chapter 1. Hearing is one thing. Do you remember as we studied Romans, first there was condemnation, and then there was justification, and then as we got to the end of Romans, we talked about application. We talked about how all that's well and good, but we have to apply those things in our lives. When we read and we study and we talk about amongst one another and we pray together, there's got to be some application. God's will for us is to not only know what the Word is, but to do it as well. To love our neighbor as ourselves. To give as we should. The list goes on and on and on and on. Application, being doers of the Word, so important. You know it's coming. Boy, that is an awesome point, Kenneth. If you were unable to hear Kenneth, I said it's like hearing a storm coming but not doing anything about it. You know, I see a group full of people, there sits one right there that went to a lot of trouble and heartache and pain to learn to be a nurse. With no application, you knew it when you got out of school, but you learned it and you did it when you got out. Don't go be a good nurse. Knowing how to be a servant of Jesus is useless if we don't take what we learned and go be a servant of Jesus. To serve our community, to serve our brothers and sisters, to serve those that are less fortunate than us. Be doers of the Word.
Our Bible reading this morning was about staying in the vine and the branches.
Can't be separated.
We have to love, abide, obey,
Yep.
and stay in the vine.
Here's an interesting one. Flipping over to Deuteronomy chapter 4. what we're talking about here is not going beyond what is written. We're going to spend just a second here. You shall not add to the word that I commanded you, nor take from it, that you may keep the commandments of the Lord your God that I commanded you. And then we're asked to go over to 1 Corinthians in chapter 4. In verse 6. Am I right there? 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 6. I have applied all these things to myself and Apollos for your benefit, brothers, that you may learn by us not to go beyond what is written, that none of you may be puffed up in favor of one against the other. Don't go beyond what was written. Don't add to or take away from what is written.
I don't believe a lot of people have read that in the world today, and even in the church.
What does that mean to you?
Means you're supposed to do it God's way and not your way.
He's trust God. Even before the written word. One of the best examples I can come up with is Sarah and Hagar.
Yeah.
You know,
So how could we add to the word? I mean, we don't have the ability to publish a new Bible. So that's not what he's talking about, is it?
how we live our life. We think we know better. And that's where we're going to live no matter what. We know it.
I have my opinions, and they're so much better than yours.
What about traditions? When we let traditions creep in and become so embedded in our life and it's not part of what's taught in the book. Is that adding to? What about if something's a little inconvenient, so we decide just to leave part out? Well, I mean, it's in there. And I have heard this said just recently. God said to do it, but you don't have to do it. Is that taken away from it? We need to be careful. We need to be careful. Jay mentioned just a minute ago about James chapter 3, where he talks about God's wisdom and our wisdom. Granted, a lot of things that apply to godly issues make no sense to us. It makes no sense. We've used the example in here before. If you want to be more blessed financially, what do you need to do with your money? Give it away. That makes no sense, does it? Have any of you, I know you have, ever challenged that and tried that? Have you ever suffered financially because you gave too much? You never will. It makes no sense. I tell you what I have learned when my giving wasn't where it should have been, is the check wouldn't hardly make it to the next one. But when my giving's where it should be, I wonder, where'd it come from? It's amazing. And God challenges us to test him in that regard. Now, this is not a lesson on giving. That's just the best example of godly and earthly wisdom that I could think of. If you want more money, give yours away. Well, yeah, go tell somebody that just has no idea about the church and see what they think about you. They're going to say you're stupid.
Like the example of that old widow woman, she gave all she had.
Wasn't much, Billy, but that was all of it, wasn't it? That's a great example. Boy, now our toes are fixing to get stepped on, guys. Number 4, the tremendous blessing and responsibility of parenting. First of all, let's flip back over here to Deuteronomy chapter 6. And we'll read verses 1 through 7. Now this is the commandment, the statutes and rules that your Lord your God commanded me to teach you, that you may do them in the land which you're going over to possess it, that you may fear the Lord your God, and you and your son and your son's son, by keeping all his statutes and commandments which I commanded you all the days of your life, that your days may be long. Hear therefore, O Israel, and be careful to do them, that it may go well with you, and that you may multiply greatly, as the Lord your God, your fathers, has promised you, in a land flowing with milk and honey. Hear, O Israel, that the Lord God is one. You shall love your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind, and these words that I commanded you today shall be on your heart. And here we go. And you shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. Before we even say anything, we'll flip over to Ephesians Chapter 6 and read 1 through 4. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and your mother. This is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you, and that you may live long. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and the instruction of the Lord. Spend time with your children talking about godly things, talking about what's in the Word. Don't make it a chore. There are lots of stories in this book that are fun. Now, there are the things that they don't need to know that aren't so fun. I am very blessed to spend time with a young man that's very knowledgeable in the Word, and he enjoys it, and you can tell those that have been around him have made that way for him. I watch our kids come in that back door, and they cannot wait to get to those classrooms. Some Sundays I've heard them say, no, there's no teacher today. You're coming in here with us. And it's, oh, that means I got to listen to James or Jay. I don't know if you've noticed, but Jay has done a great job. We go to great lengths to have a special section of time with our little ones every Sunday. I know what it does. I'm going to tell you this, and I'm going to leave it at that. If you want some discussion, that's fine. The worst I've ever had my feelings hurt in my life. A guy cornered me up and said, James, let me tell you something about being a parent. I don't even know if we had Aaron yet. He said, that baby will follow you straight to heaven, but she will follow you straight to hell too. You better think about what kind of responsibility we have. Did they make the ball team? Are they first chair in the band? Do they win the Miss Maud pageant? There's a day coming, ain't none of that going to matter. We're either going to lead our children to heaven or we're going to lead them to hell. There's a point where we can't do anything about it. But while they're under our care, I've told a bunch of parents of young children, by the time they're 12, you're about done. They're molded ever. It's something they want to do the rest of their lives. That's our responsibility here. Kenneth Jordan, since back in probably in the 1800s sometime, has been our treasurer here. It is almost impossible to get $5 away from him. But if you mention teaching material for these kids or these people in here, he will cut a check. Teach. Understand the importance of what we do here. We got hung up for a period of time on let's bring them in, let's bring them in, let's bring them in. But once we got them in, Our focus here now is on teaching, as I hope you all to hear. It wasn't comfortable for me to hear when I heard it either, but it sure set me to thinking. I hope it does you as well.
Talking about the children, I have a habit, and it's a good habit. When I invite somebody to come to church that's got children, I tell them we have an excellent.
Oh, me too. Me too. I have said this so many times before. We have got a bunch of grumpy old elders. We've got a preacher that is a wood shop guru. Our song leading is all right, but it ain't nothing special. Teaching program here that's second to none. We have got some ladies and some guys in those classrooms over one day and just go out there on Wednesday and see what they do in that fellowship hall. Drop in one of these classrooms. You will be impressed. You will be impressed.
In James Hebrews chapter 10, kind of goes along with that verse you read a while ago, verses 16 and 17. About having the word of God in it. It says, this is the covenant that I make with them after those days. Says, I will put my laws upon their heart and upon their minds, all right? And then says, and this is grace and gracious verses in it, and their sins and their lawless deeds I will remember no more.
Whew.
How do we get it written in our hearts? We learn it. How do we put it on our minds? We learn it.
And we dwell on it.
It's not just going to osmosis there.
That's exactly right. That's a great point, Dan. God doesn't wiggle his finger and all of a sudden, this is what we dwell on. Very important.
James, I think the mistake that the church has made in the past is you want to get them baptized, and you don't look at the second part of that commandment.
Teach.
Teach them to observe all that I command.
Exactly. Exactly. I hate to belittle numbers. I'm a baseball guy, so they're important to me. Bringing the lost to Christ is a big deal, but spending time with them in the Word and helping them to understand that this is not going to enjoy together is very important. The power of choice, number 5, blessing or curse. And it gives us Deuteronomy chapter 30 and verse 15 is one of our examples there. See, I have set before you today life and good, death and evil. It has been set before us. Life, good, death, evil. It's our choice. God yearns for us to be obedient to his gospel. He yearns for us to stay faithful. It's my opinion that the only reason that he hadn't destroyed this earth already is because of his desire for more and more people to come to obedience so they can enjoy heaven eternally. But he designed this to where we're free moral agents. He doesn't force any of this on us. It's a free gift that we have to take hold of. It's our choice. It's our choice to become faithful, to obey the gospel, and it's our choice to remain faithful. Hopefully, the time that we spend together nourishes that, encourages that, but ultimately it's our choice. If Kyle the Lauder hurts my feelings and I leave the church, I ain't going to church where that hypocrite goes to church. I ain't doing it. Well, maybe that's bad on Kyle, but when I stand before God one of these days, it's on me. It's my choice. Don't let anything stand between us and the promises that's been made before us. All we've talked about for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks now is these children of Israel being promised something. And ignorance, stupidity, whatever you want to call it, causing them to never be able to achieve that promise. We've been promised something too. We've been promised an eternity in heaven. And the only thing that can keep us out of there is ourselves. The only thing that can keep us out of heaven is ourselves. Don't need to let that happen. He's done his part, man. We could spend a lot of time talking about what he did. And I would hate to know that I was be asked to sacrifice my child on your behalf. If you were to ask me to sacrifice myself on your behalf, I think I could do it. I ain't sure till it comes down to it. But don't ask me to send my child to suffer a horrible death to wash away the sins of a bunch of people that hate them. A lot to think about there. From Deuteronomy chapter 1 and 1 John chapter 5, the sin of pessimism and fear. Let me read over here Deuteronomy 1:26. Yet you would not go up, but rebelled against the command of the Lord your God, their refusal to enter the land, their fear of entering the land. Now we'll flip over to 1 John chapter 5, way over on the other end of this thing, in verse 4. For everyone who has been born of God overcomes the world, and this is the victory that has overcome the world, our courage. I love, for those of you that weren't able to be in here, we're in classes outside, I really hated. Sean started teaching our Wednesday night class this past week, and he did an outstanding ask of the class is some examples of the great thing about faith. The great thing about faith is almost in every instance, the Bible shows us that people may start their walk with a very limited amount of faith, they end their walk with a huge amount of faith. Jesus' disciples were terrible at one point. We all know the story of Peter and his denial of Jesus. And I love the stories of Peter because Peter reminds James of James. Messed up a lot. But by the time he died, he was solid. He was solid. The Bible doesn't tell us this, but history tells us, as a matter of fact, when he was crucified, that he asked to be crucified upside down. It takes a certain amount of courage to do some of these things that God asks us to do Bible studies with them, to go to someone's house that's not very uncomfortable and take them a meal. Faith builds courage. Faith builds courage. Preparing leadership for the future. And the Lord God said to Moses, behold, the days approach when you must die. Call Joshua and present yourselves in the tent of meeting that I may commission him. Kind of a bad time to bring it up, but Kenneth Jordan turns 80 years old today. Now, it would be kind of foolish of us not to start preparing some for the future, wouldn't it? Same way here.
Well, we're not guaranteed tomorrow.
Doesn't matter, does it?
Much less, 80, we sure ain't guaranteed tomorrow.
That's exactly right. That's right.
So that's Kenneth years. Kenneth years is a long.
That's exactly right. It is very important for us, though, to encourage some newer young people to teach, to take leadership roles, on and on. Moses is an example of outstanding leadership. Man, I really thought we was going to do better than this today. What made, tell me some things about Moses that makes you think that he was a great leader.
Would you say that he was humble in a way?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'd say that he,
Give me his two best qualities that made him a leader.
the ones I see is him knowing just how bad people was and still went to bat.
He loved people, didn't he? He loved his countrymen. He loved them. Did he mess up? Did he make some mistakes? Is he in the heroes of faith in Hebrews chapter 11? He sure is. His faith made him special. His obedience, save a couple of occasions, especially one that I can think of, made him special. You remember as he went to Pharaoh to get those children out of Israel, out of Egypt, could you see his courage growing as that story progressed? You know what James would have said if we was fleeing out of there with a bunch of soldiers behind them and we was headed straight at the Red Sea without a boat? That don't make no sense, does it? You got to go in this way. It's solid water as far as you can see across there. Faith, obedience, love for his brethren made him special. He did. He wanted to wipe them out, and he went to bat for them, as Dan said. Gratitude's so important. God will take care of punishing the wicked. We see that in Deuteronomy chapter 32 and Romans chapter 12. We need to understand it's our job to love people and to seek and save the lost and let God take care of punishing the wicked. Idol worship will always arouse the anger of God. I looked up, I think it was Webster's definition of idol worship, worship of someone or something other than God as though it were God. Sometimes I worry about that. For instance, we've got the Olympic Games fixing to come up next month, and you'll hear people say, I have dedicated my life to this sport. While we are more than welcome to have something that we love and enjoy doing, we don't ever want to think, I've dedicated my life solely to that sport. We want to dedicate our life solely to the Christ. And then use that sport to share his message. Never ever think that your life, the most important thing in your life, is something besides Jesus Christ and the church that he died for. Dying with a song, idol worship will always around, dying with a song on our heart and being rebellious from day one. And I just put a note out there that said, don't be that guy. Guys, we'll start the study of Joshua. Old Moses is fixing to die right here. Actually, he just did. They've commissioned Joshua to take Israel into the promised land. We'll begin talking about that next Sunday if the Lord tarries in his coming.
8 to start with.